I'm Elizabeth, and I think that we should start with NAFEES because you were instrumental in creating this group at Heterodox.
Sure. So my name is NAFEES. I'm currently a professor of social work, associate professor at the University of Nebraska, formerly at Boise State University. And I, along with Heidi Rueda, who's an associate professor at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, we started Heterodox Social Work, which is the community. And the driving force behind its development was, and continues to be, that there appears to be more of an orthodox style of thinking in our discipline. Now, we are very passionate, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues here, but I can sort of guess as to what they might say about this part. We're very passionate about not addressing current orthodoxy with future orthodoxy. And so Heterodox Social Work was created with the intention of creating a pluralistic environment where all ideas are welcome and the best ideas prevail. No ideas are excluded right from the jump. So we're very happy to say also, just earlier today, and I don't think Elizabeth and Tiffany know about this yet, Matt and I shared this information earlier, just this morning, the journal Research on Social Work Practice published our article, Heidi and myself, titled Heterodox Social Work, Viewpoint, Diversity, Constructive Disagreement, and Open Inquiry in Social Work. And for social work, it's a higher impact factor journal. It's not as high as Nature, right? It's not at 60.9. But for the field of social work, it has a 5-year impact factor of 2.0, which is high for our discipline. So all that to say, we are starting to get heard, and I'm really happy about that.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I am Dr. Tiffany Victoria Jones. I'm a research methodologist. So I'll make my long, ridiculous story short. I was canceled for not agreeing that men can give birth. And of course, when I went through that and the backlash of it, it was very uncomfortable. But it led me to exploring how we have gone in academia from producing great thought to indoctrination. So here I am in front of you beautiful people. That's it.
I'm Matthew Watson. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I live in Utah. When I was living in Arizona in 2018, a colleague and I met on the My NASW website, which is a website that enables, it's a posting board for social workers sponsored by the National Association of Social Workers. And through that experience, I connected with others, and one is Xander Kaag. He was the 2020 NASW Social Worker of the Year, and we were invited to author a book when we both ended up posting some questions about whether someone with traditional or conservative values could be a real social worker. And in response to that, the NASW Press reached out and asked if we would publish or might be interested in doing so. But then 2020 happened, the pandemic, the George Floyd, the summer, and the election. There were just a number of things where the press ultimately decided not to. But since then, we have formed an organization called ProSocial Workers, where we take a heterodox view and we engage in pro-social practices and try to encourage viewpoint and political diversity in social work. And we have ASWB accreditation so that people can get continued education for listening to our podcasts and participating with us.
So I do know, because I know these three people, I know there's a little bit of disagreement amongst you on some of these items. So feel free to maybe not interrupt one another, but I don't want to move too fast if you all want to respond to one another. I'm going to start off with just a super easy general question. She says sarcastically, can we be orthodox in a heterodox way? Do we have a volunteer to answer that question first?
All right, NAFEES has volunteered me, so I will, or voluntold me that I'll go first, so I'll do that. I certainly believe so. there can be orthodox views, that people may have orthodox political views, orthodox religious views, but it's important that that in your orthodoxy you must countenance, I believe, others' beliefs and others' perspectives. So you, for example, in your own faith, you may be, orthodox or traditional in your approach to whatever that may be, or your approach to politics. But the important thing is that you believe what you believe, you state what you believe, you can have a logical or some type of a defensible position for it, and then you countenance or tolerate the beliefs of others. And so whether you have a strong belief or orientation in critical race theory, for example, or critical theory in and of itself, there have been efforts to cancel the teaching of that theory in public schools and so forth. That's not necessarily what we're suggesting, but we're suggesting that heterodoxy is about inviting beliefs from many people, and it's not about the domination, obviously. And so I think you really can be orthodox or traditional, or whatever term you want to use, as long as you are inviting perspectives from others.
Tiffany, can you be orthodox in a heterodox way?
I believe so. I think for me, that would look like holding my beliefs. There are some beliefs that I have very dearly, and I don't deviate from at all. And I'm open to sharing those beliefs, but I think for me the line is drawn when there's imposition and when there's force to adapt another view or whatnot. So I think it's good to share, it's good to hold those dear beliefs, but the problem comes in when we try to force others. So.
Yeah, I think the question digs at, can we understand viewpoints without necessarily having to agree with them? And so the answer is kind of twofold, is can we? Obviously, not obviously, I think we can. Do we, or is that a commonality? I certainly don't think that's the case. I think there's a tendency for us to get so delved into our own perspectives, especially once you've gotten the credentials, whatever those credentials might be, that validate what you've been doing this entire time. And so you feel like what you have to say is more important than what others have to say, just because you've got some letters either in front of your name or after your name. And so if we can look at, and if we can speak person to person as opposed to professional to professional, as opposed to credential to credential, who has more letters after their name does not necessarily make them more right. I think we have the opportunity to do that. I love education. Obviously, I wouldn't have gotten a doctorate and I wouldn't be a professor if I didn't love education, but I think it's important to be honest about what education is and is not as well. The more credentialed you are, someone with a master's degree often tends to think of someone with a bachelor's degree as not being worldly and knowledgeable enough. Nothing could be further from the truth, right? It's person to person, not professional to professional. Long way of answering the question, can we? Yes. Are we? Do we? Usually no.
So let's get a little more specific to social work. Again, I know that this conversation has been going on within your own organization, Matt, but how is heterodoxy implied or not, perhaps, in social work's core values?
Am I going again?
Sure. So heterodox is implied in our core values by the fact that differing ideas are welcome. Particularly, I'm going to give you an example from my own personal history. I've sat in front of legislators and talked about the importance of being able to teach critical race theory, and at the same time talked about how conservative viewpoints should also be welcome in the classroom environment. So the idea, and then once you hear both of that, you're like, oh, where does NAFEES stand? Is he a Republican? Is he down? Is he left? Right? the answer is it really doesn't matter, does it? I mean, if we were friends, then maybe it does. If we were going out, hanging out, and talking about random things, then maybe it matters. But in a professional setting, creating an inclusive environment means inclusive to all ideas. And so modeling that behavior, I think, is very important. And so I've tried to do that as much as I could by standing up for left-leaning ideas as much as right-leaning ideas. And of course, the left thinks I'm right and the right thinks I'm left. You know, I imagine others in the audience feel the same way about how they're perceived as well. So that's how we try to, or at least I try to create heterodoxy in the work that I do.
I think that it's implied through our core values and our code of ethics. So our core values undergird the code of ethics. And I think one way that we see, or that heterodoxy could be implied, is how those ethical principles are interpreted. So here's a really good example. Core value number 3 for the profession of social work is dignity and worth of the person. When I hear that, I think all people, including preborn people. And yet, our profession as a whole doesn't stand on with that idea. I think it was around 22, maybe 23, whenever the Roe versus Wade law was overturned. NASW, which is our national chapter, released a statement condemning the overturning of the law, and they hearkened to one of our code of ethics, which is self-determination. So now we've got a competing principle. We've got this core value of dignity and worth of the person competing with self-determination. We've got another ethical principle, which is that we give primacy to the preservation of life. So we've got these competing ideas. Well, whose understanding of it is right? So I think in that regard, we can see heterodoxy implied. Where I think the profession goes wrong is that the idea of there being multiple ideas is that having that idea is not well embraced. And if you hold a viewpoint such as mine, that all lives, including those preborn lives, matter, then that's not very well welcome. So.
Well, and I would agree with Tiffany that the NASW Code of Ethics, I think, is very solid. It has, in the preamble, it talks about how that not any one particular value takes primacy, that context matters, and understanding that context is going to be unique in how we dialogue and work through those ethical dilemmas and challenges. It's noted in the preamble. But then you have 6 values that I think are great. You know, the emphasis on service, the emphasis on social justice defined in the Code of Ethics as equality of opportunity or enabling opportunity, not necessarily the equality of outcome. That's, I think, an important differentiation, that in the code itself, it actually states that we emphasize those opportunities for many people. The dignity and worth of the person is, as Tiffany mentioned, the importance of human relationships, integrity, competence. I mean, it's a very solid code. But it's in the application that I think we find some struggles, where there has currently been in particular orthodoxy in how it's approached or how it is implemented. Not by all, but by some. And when I've reached out to some of the leadership within NASW and had interactions with them as we've done that, there's been good dialogue. It's been helpful, but in terms of interacting with some of our other social work colleagues and friends, sometimes it's very difficult because there is a perceived ideological emphasis on say the progressive left And there is some research. Elizabeth, you and I have reviewed an article, a dissertation on that particular issue and interviewed the author and have reached out in goodwill to try and do that. I think that the code of ethics itself is solid. It's just the application that we're seeing where there's some struggles in how do we operationalize that.
How can social work education specifically maintain a commitment to the ethical principles and still create space for diverse and potentially competing interpretations of these principles? Maybe you want to start, Matt, because you kind of led into this.
Well, I don't know. I thought maybe Tiffany may want to start with her own experiences, but do you want to give it a go?
Sure. Well, so how can we?
How can social work education maintain a commitment to ethical principles and still create space for diverse and sometimes competing interpretations of how those principles should be applied?
Okay. Well, so as an educator, I believe in the heart of academia and how it began. So I usually, I'll share this quote with my students when I start each class. If you've not seen The Wizard of Oz, raise your hand. If you've not. Okay. So it's an old classic movie, 1939. I'm going to take us back to the part where Toto pulls back the curtain and reveals that the Wizard of Oz is not who he said he was. If you remember this part, afterward, the Scarecrow says, "Oh no, now I'll never get a brain." And the Wizard of Oz says, "No, back where I come from," this is the quote, "back where I come from, we have universities, seats of great learning, where men and women," I added that part, "go to become great thinkers." We have universities, seats of great learning, where men and women go to become great thinkers. That's the heart of academia. Go back to 1931, Albert Einstein. That's my dude. I love Albert Einstein. But he said, in response to a criticism about not knowing some details about, I think, Thomas Edison's, his design with the light bulb, Albert Einstein said in response, the purpose of college is not the learning of many facts, but the training of the mind to think. Again, 1931, harking back to Carter G. Woodson. Again, 1933, I think I like the 30s, where he talked about if you can control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about what that person's going to do. That person's going to act based according to how you've trained him to think. So all that said, academia is about training the mind to think, learning how to think critically, learning how to reason, learning how to spot errors in reasoning, learning how to address those errors in reasoning, and making habitual practice of not repeating those errors. And in that, producing great new thoughts. That's always been the heart of academia, but somehow that disappeared at some point, and now we're in this age of indoctrination, where we're not presenting these different ways of understanding or training the mind to think. Instead, and I say we, I'm talking about academia, not any individual, but it's like we're going into the classroom demanding that our students think this specific way, this specific thought, and there's no room for other ideas. So to the question, Elizabeth, I think that the way to handle social work education, presenting it, being honorable to it, and holding the integrity to what academia is supposed to be in light of our social work principles, is sharing varying ideas. So I'll give a personal example. When I teach theories, I never teach one set of theories. So postmodernist perspectives, for example, I always teach the counter. I teach critical race theory. I think it's a great theory for some things. I think it's good for what it's designed to do as a theory. But it, like all theories, has limitations. So teaching the full breadth of the theory, its advantages, its limitations, and its counter. Critical race theory has a counter. So it's under the body of critical theories. Its counter is going to be the functionalist theory and theories along those lines. So teaching those counters and allowing the students to make their own judgments. We give them the tools, and then they make good decisions. That's how I think we can handle it.
NAFEES, you're in the classroom every day.
Yeah, I think the application of those ethical principles is in and of itself an ethical principle. And so social work education, the accrediting body is the Council on Social Work Education. And it'll be important for us to get a space in whatever room they have for their 2029 EPAS, Educational Policies and Standards. And we've started to do that. 2029 is a little ways away, but they are starting to think about what those 2029 EPAS standards will be, or EPAS will be, standards will be twice, right? So 2029 EPAS would be. And so they recently had a forum on academic freedom, I think just about 2 weeks ago, June 12th. And, you know, it went how you would expect, as in academic freedom applied only from a certain perspective, but not necessarily inclusive of other. It seems like some of the audience were included in that forum, as well as, from what I'm told, very heavily attended. And so, you know, having an impact, heterodox social work and heterodoxy, having an impact on the 2029 EPAS is going to be important. And I think people get afraid when we talk about 2029. It's like, well, we're in 2025. Like, why are we thinking about 2029? I think it'll be healthy for us, and this might be a point of disagreement. Please do chime in. It'll be healthy for us to understand that this is a long game. I think it'll be healthy for us, and I imagine some of the audience members might disagree with this too. I think it'll be healthy for us to understand that 2029 is something more realistic than 2026, for example. And people look at me funny when I say that. I'm like, we should be, you know, trying to make change quicker. No, change might happen quickly, and then change in the opposite direction might happen quickly as well. So I think if we want to create sustaining change, academic freedom, constructive disagreement, open inquiry, viewpoint diversity in social work education, when historically it hasn't been present since 2001, 2008, 2015, 2022. These are the EPAS that have existed. I think playing the long game and being steady, strong and steady, is going to be the way to approach this. So that's my opinion.
So from a more practitioner perspective, what's your answer to this question, Matt?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now, in my understanding, it's been many years since I've been in the classroom, but what I've heard is that from students that we supervise and so forth, is that there's an encouragement for activism. And activism presupposes that you have an idea or a thought or a theory or an outcome that you're pursuing, that you've already thought that through, and if you're taking an activist approach, you have something defined that you are promoting or encouraging. And in response to what NAFEES was just describing and what Tiffany has shared before, if social work classrooms are more about dialoguing across differences and helping students learn to identify what they believe, identify and articulate their perspectives, I think that is going to have a much more effective approach, because that in and of itself is a social process, not necessarily an activist approach where something particular is being pursued or encouraged. And so I think slowing things down, engaging in dialogue, engaging in considering different perspectives, and then once you have an idea or something that you believe that you would like to pursue, then then pursue the activist or the advocacy approach, but be very careful about the activist role right off the bat.
So I'm going to go off script here because we do have some questions that we talked about. But this is all very lovely. It's, you know, I mean, but I'm also in the classroom. And to a large extent, students want the answer. Not an answer, but the answer. And they want to be rewarded for this sort of activist. It's like, look at me being, you know, whether that's just posting something or whether that's truly showing up. So how much of this is a problem within social work or, you know, another field, and this ethical kind of dilemma, and how much of this is driven by our own need for, you know, good teaching evaluations to get, you know, the right internship or supervisory position to get the, you know, get the right answer on a test.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation about education as a whole. Is that it's become so much about input output, and I would imagine that makes sense in kindergarten, maybe junior high school, maybe high school, because you're learning the fundamentals. But once you get to college, once you get to your master's, and if you're talking about input-output conversations in your doctorate, I question the doctorate degree. Because at that point, it is a PhD, philosophical doctorate, right? So that's when you're marrying the questions and you're dating the answers. Never do that in real life, obviously. If you're married, don't date. But from that conceptual standpoint, you know, higher education, in my opinion, is about marrying the questions. And the answers will be different as we go along. But, you know, early on, it makes sense to marry those answers. 2 + 2 = 4. Make sure that you know it's 4. Marry the 4, right? And so then 2 + 2 turns into 1 + 3 or 4 + 0. So the questions change, but the answer stays the same. But when you get to higher education, the questions will stay the same, the answers will change, right? And so I think we don't do a good enough job, and this might be a hot take, in higher education across universities, America and internationally. I have a little bit of an international background, being an immigrant myself. The world of higher education does not do a good job, in my opinion, of showing students, incoming freshman students, how this is going to be different now. How first year of college is going to be different from last year of high school. And part of that, I'm hopeful that Heterodox, actually I know that Heterodox Academy is working on these tools as sort of like freshman orientation tools to help students acclimate to how different college is, and where now open inquiry is a major part of that education. And I don't know if it's the fault of administrators, if it's the fault of professors, or if it's the fault of the culture, because we are student evaluation hunting. You know, the more we've talked about this and we've done research on this. The more attractive the professor, the higher the student evaluations. Right? The easier the classes, the higher the student evaluations. Essentially, and this is being recorded, so I might get myself in trouble. Essentially, the less students learn, the higher the student evaluations. Essentially, the more students are made to feel like they already know it all, the higher the student evaluations. And that's usually how we are gauged as professors. When we're going up for tenure, when we have tenure, it's scholarship, teaching, and service, right? And that teaching part is almost exclusively dependent on student evaluations often. And so I think this is more of a systemic topic.
I just have to agree with that. I mean, my goodness gracious. I had an experience once where a student told me she was my ally because I did not agree with something that she said. And so I presented my view. It was opinion-based. So neither of us was right or wrong. It was just an opinion-based discussion. And her response to me was that she was my ally. And I had to pause and definitely not respond in the moment, because I think I would have probably gotten fired. But I ended up telling her exactly, I told her what I thought in a more diplomatic way. In essence, she was not my ally. I didn't ask her to be my ally. If I needed an ally, it wouldn't be her. But I thought about that, and this idea that some of our students are coming into the classroom with this mindset of, I'm going to be, well, before they see me, right? Before they see me. They see the name Tiffany Victoria Jones. Okay, there's no picture to that. Research methodologists, they come in and then they see me, and now I've got to put on my activism cape. I'm now your hero. I'm your ally. I'm your advocate. No, you're my student. And so I think this idea of these preset roles or these preset ideas of what advocacy looks like, what activism looks like, especially in terms of social work, because those are skills that we develop. And our students, many of them are coming in thinking they have those skills already, and they're way off mark. So it's all of it, I take it as either opportunities for me to learn, or definitely opportunities to teach. These are great teaching moments for our students. But I don't know if they're leaving away feeling as though, I don't know if that young lady left away. Well, I know she didn't. She didn't leave with the idea that she was not in my class to be an ally to me, but rather to learn. And I'm one of the harder professors, because I've always said I don't want to be the popular one that everyone likes. I want my students leaving my class knowing their stuff. I want them to know research methods, know how to do this accurately, soundly, and ethically. And I don't think that young lady left away with what I was trying to convey to her. She left away with her feelings hurt. Why didn't you let me rescue you? So it's something to contend with.
Just from a practitioner's perspective, I think that it was just described very well that if the emphasis is on truth, if the classroom emphasis is on truth rather than what's popular or what appears in the current culture to be, or the zeitgeist to be popular or virtuous, those virtues, the virtue signaling sometimes can really get in the way of the pursuit of truth. Sometimes asking difficult questions or unpopular questions are the things that tend to have a significant difference or make a significant difference, because by asking those questions, you're either validating something that's true or sometimes disproving something that is assumed to be. And so I think if we can emphasize truth over things that are popular or things that are attractive, that's a pretty significant role, and I think that's obviously the purpose of why we're all here.
So do any of you have any specific strategies or practical tools that you can share for sort of fostering this intellectual humility among social workers and among practitioners? You know, any examples or particular approaches?
Well, from a pro-social worker's perspective, what we inherently do is we humanize differences, we dialogue across differences, and we stand for ethical principles. So we're not just dialoguing for the sake of dialogue, we're dialoguing in the context of what is ethical, what is defined as the code of ethics within social work. And we are not just trying to pursue a specific agenda, but we are inviting dialogue so that different perspectives can be heard and understood. And that's why it's pro-social. We're not trying to pursue any particular agenda. We're not trying to be anti-social, if you will. We're acknowledging that in any relationship, in any culture, in any community, it's inherently social. And so we focus and we emphasize those social differences to do those three things.
A tool that I use is, especially if I'm teaching the literature review, I'll have my students take the opposite position. You already know what you believe, okay? So, search the literature for points that contradict what you believe. Let's start there. And then work to literature that supports your idea, your hypothesis. So that's one way that I get them moving in the direction of acknowledging that there are other viewpoints.
Yeah, so I use the point counterpoint teaching philosophy, which I'm hoping to get published pretty soon. I just submitted it. And the idea is very similar to what Tiffany was talking about, is that my expectation for the certain assignments is for students, actually I'll give you an actual tool, right? So it's a vlog assignment that students will have to submit, let's say on the topic of abortion, right? Since that's what we've been talking about for a little bit here. So whether you're pro-choice, pro-life, or somewhere, it doesn't matter to me. Within about a minute, I want to see you on a vlog. So you're recording yourself on the camera, you're talking about one perspective, and then give it a pause, and then you're talking about a different perspective. If based on that 1 minute assignment, I know where you actually stand, you're going to get a lower grade, or you're going to be asked to do the assignment over again. I need to know that you can argue on behalf of your point, which is fairly easy to do. You don't need a degree for that. What you need a degree for is arguing on behalf of points that you don't necessarily agree with, but still can demonstrate that you understand. And so, especially early on in the semester, students will have to resubmit their assignments. I thought I tricked you. I'm like, no, you didn't make eye contact the way. I know exactly what you think. I know it's B, or I know it's A. Just redo it. And it's not a contentious thing, because over the course of the semester, students get an opportunity to research what would someone who thinks differently from me actually think, and how would that person speak confidently. And so toward the end of the semester, week 14, week 7 if it's in the summer, right? So at the end of the semester, I can't tell what students are thinking based on those 2 vlog assignments within one larger video. And so they get higher grades as a result. So that's one tool that I've been using that's been effective.
Would you tell us a little bit about the legal moral matrix too? Because I know you just got a paper published on that.
Yeah, so the legal moral matrix is sort of a spectrum of legality and morality, and things will differ back and forth as far as what students will think should be legal and what should be moral. So generally speaking, education has been about, do you think this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? And then we just move forward. The world is not as simple as that binary. So some things can be legal but considered to be immoral. Marijuana is a good example of this, where students in any given classroom will have very different ideas as far as what degree of morality marijuana holds and what degree of legality marijuana should hold as well. Elizabeth can speak to this as well, because she and I are co-authoring, along with a student of hers, on this topic as well. And the whole idea is to introduce more nuance into the classroom. So if you get and I presented this in the FIRE conference, if any of you were there, then you might be familiar with myself and that idea. But the concept behind it was just to add more nuance to it. So instead of a two-dimensional space of morality, we add a three-dimensional space of morality and legality. And the idea is to continue to add dimensions to it. So this way, students will understand where they stand in a three-dimensional, four-dimensional, five-dimensional space, where it's not just about legality, morality. You might want to add time was something that I wanted to consider as well. Time was running out at that point. So time, like what time frame are we in? Something that's appropriate in the 1950s may not be appropriate in 2025. What are we doing today? What is commonplace today, 2025, that in 2055 will be seen as, oh my God, I can't believe people are doing that. People are saying that word? What is that word? We don't know that word, but we're using it. We're probably going to use it today, but in 20, 30 years from now, people will think of us as bigots for using it, right? So time is another dimension too. So it gets more and more complex, more and more nuanced. So that's another tool that has been published. I should have mentioned that first. That's already been published, so I'm happy about that.
And students do think of themselves as fully baked by the time they get to college. It's like, well, this is who I'm going to be for the rest of my life, right? Anything? I just want to make sure that you don't have anything.
No, just referring back to, all of these things just reflect some dialogue, some interaction, the social nature of social work. And one of our courses that we produce has to do with dialogue. And is dialogue the end, or is it the means to the end? Or might it be both? And if you're dialoguing, you are practicing social work. Sometimes it's not easy. It's rarely easy. But the importance of dialogue in any of these things, you can just see that that's inherent and foundational to it.
W.B. Du Bois. That was one of the key points of his Niagara movement in 1899.
Very good. Learned something new.
And we thought she only knew about 1930. I'm sure someone in the audience would ask this question if I didn't, but how do you respond to concerns that promoting viewpoint diversity might inadvertently legitimize harmful perspectives, maybe things that even run counter to social work's commitment to marginalized communities?
I think the first part of that is to question what constitutes harm. And I say that because it seems like harm within the last maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, has come to mean I don't agree with you, or you don't agree with me, or you've hurt my feelings. And I would not conceptualize harm that way. So I think it's important to understand what constitutes harm, what makes a harmful perspective, in order to determine how do we handle answering those, addressing those ideas, presenting them. Just start with that.
What is it? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words hurt even worse, right? So that's the new saying these days. I mean, I grew up at a time when words were just that, right? And now you can make an argument that society is softer, but at the same time you can make an argument that society is better for it, because now we're better equipped to not be so offensive with our words. So I think the way to navigate this is, and you can't prove it, that's the problem with it, is that to assume that all parties are there in good faith. Just like we're up here, just like you're down there, not down there, over there in the audience. The idea is that we're all here in good faith with a desire to understand, and the questions are there with a desire to critique for the idea around being progress. And so if we can all act in good faith, then why not welcome all ideas into that room? And those ideas that are bad ideas, and there are plenty of them. This is not, I would imagine none of the panelists would suggest that no idea is a bad idea. I think that's silly, right? Jumping off of the Empire State Building with no parachute, bad idea, right? It's pretty obvious. But still an idea worth consideration, because why is that a bad idea? Well, now let's talk about gravity, which I think we all are experts in. Just by coming up on this podium and jumping off, we can become experts in that, right? But why not welcome all ideas and assume that conversations will take place in good faith? Now, this is where we come into some trouble, is that there will be some bad faith actors, inevitably, and we're still able to navigate through that. Why is it that the bad faith actors get to define heterodoxy in this example? Why is it that, I don't want to speak for the audience, and I don't want to speak for my fellow panelists, why is it that there are people that are alt-right, let's say, and me being affiliated with Heterodox Academy, some of my colleagues think that I'm alt-right too. And I don't know anyone who's alt-right who's affiliated with the Heterodox Academy, but me questioning the orthodoxy within social work, people think of me as acting in bad faith. I'm like, why? Why is that the case? Why can't we create an environment where all ideas are welcome, and then we have a conversation to vet out what the good ideas are and what the bad ideas are? So, long way of answering your question, but the point is to start with the assumption that we are all acting in good faith, and we all want what's best for our profession and for the world.
Another thing that just comes to mind is there's a difference between discomfort and harm. And when we're out of our comfort zone, when we're hearing something new or something that is disconfirming for us, or something that is contrary to what we've come to believe, sometimes that can be very difficult. At the same time, it can be challenging to put yourself out there and to articulate something that you may believe, or at least have a hypothesis in, or have a question about when the winds or the river is flowing in an opposite direction. And so sometimes it feels like you may be swimming upstream. But the beauty of that, I think, is that by putting it out there and looking for things that may be and creating some discomfort for yourself or for others, it either speaks an unspoken truth, or you will naturally be corrected, and you'll improve and you'll be strengthened because you will be refined in what you believe. You'll be improved through this process of dialogue, if you will have the courage to do so. And so I think just differentiating harm and discomfort. The discomfort is just the natural byproduct of new and novel relationships when there's uncertainty about what you may be experiencing or believing.
And there's no law against being uncomfortable. The academic space really, in my opinion, should make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. You're entering that space with ideas, and here are some new ideas. Maybe questions you haven't asked before, or that questions you haven't asked or answered. And so I think it's good to have a little bit of discomfort, because now it makes you really think about why you stand where you stand. And what I ended up having to tell my students after a huge backlash was, there's a reason that you feel so uncomfortable. First of all, can you defend your position? If you're unable to defend your position, I think you need to think about why you have that position. And if you can't come up with a good decision as to why you have that position, you might want to question it and perhaps change it. It's nothing wrong with changing your idea. It's nothing wrong with knowing a new way. I wish in academia we can just go back to that open inquiry. All this talk about being uncomfortable and that isn't even the word that's used. That's the more appropriate word. But being harmed, you've harmed me. That's a serious thing. That's a serious accusation to levy onto somebody, that they've harmed you. Think of harm. You beat someone up, or you commit a more gruesome crime. You go to jail for harm. How does dialoguing, saying a truth, saying a fact, saying an opinion, how does that create harm? I think we really need to talk about that. And ultimately, just question where that discomfort comes from, and be okay with it.
And we accept harm, we accept discomfort in so many other places in our life, right? We accept that, as growing pains in relationships, or, in when we're kids, or in the gym, right? We accept that. And I do put discomfort on my syllabi. I put that it's a sign of growth and that they should embrace it. So I do put a statement on my syllabus. I don't know if any of you do anything like that.
Yeah, I've gotten into the habit of writing into my syllabus and syllabi that the classroom environment might not be an emotionally safe space all the time, but it will always be an intellectually brave space. As in, if you end up getting offended by the things we're talking about, then that might happen. But you will be intellectually better for it, even if for 30 minutes to an hour you're emotionally hurt over it.
So there's commitment to social justice in the ethical principles. What constitutes justice? Again, a really easy question.
Well, equality is one thing, but specifically, as I mentioned earlier, equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcome. Equality of outcome would require that you have similar beliefs, similar values, different beliefs are going to produce different outcomes inherently. And so I really feel strongly that the equality of opportunity gives people an opportunity to learn, to practice, to change, to adapt. If they find that their specific approach isn't working, they themselves can self-correct or course-correct rather than having an authoritarian approach that says, no, you will do this, or you will believe this, or you will practice in this way. I really believe that justice is equality of opportunity.
I don't have anything different than that. It's fair treatment.
Yeah, same as just, equality of opportunity. Justice meaning that, I'll make it a little bit more complex. Like, I always wonder about how is social justice different from justice? How is political correctness different from correctness? And when we have that conversation, if we're being selective with how justice is applied, if that's how we're going to define social justice, then inherently that would mean social justice is not justice, right? So we have these conversations, not necessarily saying that I believe it. In fact, I too marry the questions, and I have no answers myself. So I consider myself someone who will be a forever student with no answers and questions always. But that is one of the questions that come to mind. Why is it that we have to call it social justice, and the word justice doesn't capture the social part? Why is it that we have to call it political correctness when the word correctness doesn't capture the political part? Are you telling me political correctness is different than correctness? Are you telling me that social justice is different than justice? So I think it's worth looking further into.
So I want to leave time. We do have some other questions that we could ask, but I want to leave time for questions from the audience.
People who had been on the other end of the social work field, and maybe they were able to get an education and they wanted to give back, and they became social workers. So those people would then have the moral currency to push back maybe on some ideological stuff and say, hey, look, I've been on both sides of this, and I'm afraid that some of your dogma doesn't apply, and I can tell you because that was my life 10 years ago or whatnot. I'm wondering if you could comment on the demographics of the field. Is there a problem that too many people who are in social work, their own experience is detached from the needs that people in social work are serving? Because I guess I'm not in the field, but it strikes me that if you had more people who had experienced that in an authentic way, they would be maybe less inclined to be captured by highly abstract dogmas that don't reflect the needs of the people that social workers are serving.
So I don't know specific demographics. I'm going to present my understanding. In my lived experience, I love that. So redundant. But what I've encountered are people who have experienced some level of trauma, and they really don't want others to go through what they went through. So they enter the field. It's been my experience that the majority, or at least many, of students and social workers come from traumatized backgrounds. So I think it's so interesting that you present it as though, and it makes sense that, oh, well, you went through this, so you would know to not hold these certain hard views or whatnot. But what I have found is that because they've gone through these traumatic backgrounds, I'm just going to speak very plainly, they're coming in with their capes on. And they're saying, okay, I'm going to rescue you. Oh, that was an injustice. You didn't agree? That's an injustice. So now I'm going to protect the person who you've just victimized with your words. There's this idea of vindictive protectiveness. I learned about that term from the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. And it was so fascinating to learn that there's a term for this. But that idea of I'm going to come in and rescue, I'm going to be the ally to this person who you just victimized. And I'm using the term victimized very loosely. But it seems to me that part of the reason why there is that this in social work, especially in schools of social work, there often are all of these complaints about being mistreated or treated poorly or harmed. There are a lot of these complaints, and they're coming from people who've been traumatized. And I think it's partly because they haven't worked through their own traumas before getting into school. They're entering school to work through their traumas. And it just creates a really hostile environment for everybody. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Because we end up as educators, NAFEES, I don't know if you have this experience, but having to almost put on your social work hat. I've had to say so many times, I'm not here as a therapist. I am here as a methodologist. And so, yeah.
You know, your question has a built-in answer to a different question. And that is that, well, to answer your question directly, yes, like many social workers have an idea of what problem it is that they want to solve because they've experienced it themselves. And so the larger idea that this relates to is that there are lots of social work. Heterodox social work has nearly 100 members right now, most of whom are faculty members from across the United States. We would not have thought that would be the case when we started it just less than a year ago. Yeah, so it's a lot of members, and I can also tell you those are 100 members that are willing to be named. I know folks who are pre-tenure that don't want to be named yet, students also who don't want to be named yet in that member listing. And so what happens now is that there are soon going to be enough social workers who will have the experience of being canceled or exiled from a viewpoint perspective or a political perspective. And so they will now begin coalitions to create more inclusivity, viewpoint inclusivity in the future of social work, at least in my opinion.
So this makes me think about another session that was held yesterday that, you know, what came up was the sort of need for different kind of training opportunities for people in the helping professions in the mental health space. And that's what I think comes up for me, is I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think a lot of us come into the work with our own particular stuff. And when I was teaching, that was one of the things I sort of, my first question to students was always like, why are you here? And almost 70% of the class would always, because I really always wanted to help people. And my pushback had always been, that's a lie, right? That most of us are here because we didn't get into a particular course that required a little bit more rigor in terms of your maths and sciences. Some of us are in here because we got unhealed childhood stuff. Others of us are here because this is a quick way to get power over other people in social situations. And until you can interrogate what the real underlying reason that you're in this work, you will stumble. Because the first client that tells you to F off or spits in your face, or the first case that doesn't go perfectly, you're going to disintegrate. And so anyways, the thing that I'm really curious about is creating more opportunities for mental health and social work training that allows for healthier folks to enter into the work, and folks who have a diversity of thought and a diversity of type, right? You know, we also recognize that there's certain kinds of personality types that tend towards these professions. I'd love to see people who might be a bit more contrarian enter into the field, and I think that would sort of contribute to more rigor in our space. But I'm curious about, I know OTI exists, but has there been thought given to the creation of opportunities for alternative training?
You mean like pro-social workers? That is precisely what we do. That social workers, we're not a finished product. We're all a work in progress. And we all, by interacting with each other in a pro-social manner, we learn from each other. You can say that it is healing, that by having these podcasts, these presentations, these discussions, these panel discussions, that is an opportunity to develop social work as a profession and to develop the social workers themselves by exposing one another to different perspectives, to refining our perspectives, to dialoguing and learning that, you know what, we don't know it all. We have some work to do, and we're trying to do that work. And while we're doing it, our content is all free. We're not trying to limit that content. We wanted to get it out to as many people as possible. There's only a fee if you need continuing education, and then you can pay for a subscription or pay for but it's very nominal. It's very limited. And so we're doing what we can to make the information freely available, but also credentialed by the Association of Social Work Boards.
Yeah, so you mentioned Open Therapy Institute. Yeah, they've been a great resource, especially with the 2 PDFs that they have on their front page of mental health issues that are not addressed. ProSocial Workers has been great. We've got courses that are available related to viewpoint and political diversity in social work. Heterodox social work, I encourage you to join that as well. Institute for Liberal Values is really good as far as creating spaces for this discourse. Ultimately, there's a need for it, right? And we're in a good space because now OTI exists, pro-social workers exist, heterodox social work now exists, Institute for Liberal Values exists. So there are organizations working to address the orthodoxy that has existed in so many of these disciplines, social work being one of them. And so I think, in my opinion, and this might be the eternal optimist, I think the future is looking bright.
I think I was thinking about more formal training programs, right? So I think OTI and all these other sorts of examples are great for those who are already doing the work or who would go there sort of led by their own sort of experiences. But I don't see as many formal opportunities for learning outside of the bounds of the current orthodoxy. And so I guess that's what I'm sort of curious about, is the creation of really formalized, strong institutions that can buffer up against some of the more illiberal ones that we've seen.
So institutions meaning like universities, or?
Yeah, or like, for example, I know that a lot of private therapy training programs exist, like creating just sort of more contained, rigorous, not that I'm saying that none of the work that's being done, I'm part of HXA social work, but something a bit more brick and mortar, even if it's not necessarily brick and mortar. Does that make sense?
That's a good idea. I think it's important. I don't know of any organizations that exist in that regard. You might want to spearhead that.
Come with us.
But yeah, I think that's a good idea, and that might actually be the next. I don't have a business degree. I think, if I did, I would imagine that would be the next step. Because we have been playing a very, very conservative game, not politically. You know what I mean? Like very, very safe sort of game of just like inching up a little bit, making sure that we're not stepping on any toes. And at a certain point, we need to take up space. You know what I mean? And I wonder if now is that time. What would you think? Do you think it's that time, or do you think it's more like, because then it's fine to disagree, but I tend to think that it's still time to inch slowly, but others tend to think that it's time to really take up space. What do you think?
So I think two things can exist at the same time. I think that you brought it up, this idea of long game, awesome. But then I think of things like UATX, right? Yeah. Who said, I'm just going to do a bold move. But in those spaces, there's a disregard for the sort of helping professions in their space. There's no one sort of building something that is comparable for those of us in the sort of helping professions in the mental health space. And so that's something that I've given a lot of sort of consideration around, is that rather than trying to convince these very embedded institutions to make incremental changes over a long time. Yeah. There's 3 really great folks on stage. What would it look like if more seasoned, rigorous folks were saying, I'm gonna just build a thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I think, and I don't want to dominate here, but I think part of that is going to be licensure, making sure to have questions related to viewpoint and political diversity. Are licensed social workers cognizant and respectful of clients and colleagues who share different political viewpoints than they do? That's obviously not there now, but I think that'll be really just taking up space. Once we get there, once we're able to get the ASWB, the NASW, and the CSWE, the three major players in social work, to at least acknowledge viewpoint and political diversity, I think that would be really taking up space, at least in my opinion.
I think as well, if we are developing, say, a library of courses or content that can be used not just in professional continuing education, but in the classroom as well, where faculty could come and access our content. Again, we've made it available, free of charge to those who want to use it. They only pay for the for the continuing education. Might do something similar for the classroom. But kind of a repository where you can find what you're looking for in this, and I hope we can discuss and dialogue afterwards.
My question, well, it's twofold. One is a bit of a shameless plug for my talk in this afternoon, because I'm talking about the training of mental health practitioners.
We're looking forward to it.
Oh, great. My question is about the credibility of social workers. I think we could agree it's taken a hit. And what do we do to assess the damage that's been done? I like these ideas for improving education, but what about what's already been so wounded? How do we address that?
I guess I will take that question first. Your question doesn't have an answer, but this is my shot at it. I think it starts by acknowledging that our credibility has taken a hit. I think those who refuse to admit that are continuing to perpetuate the decline of our credibility. I think we need to say, this is what we've done. This is how we course correct. But being very transparent and being very accountable. Social work does a great job. This is another thing that might get me canceled. Social work does a great job of telling every other profession to be transparent and accountable. Social work needs to own a mirror, I think. Social work has a great lens to look at other professions. Once social work buys itself a really good mirror, I think we'll be in a better place.
It takes humility, though. I mean, everything you said, NAFEES, I agree with ideally, but we've got to start with, well, the acknowledgement. But in order to acknowledge, there's got to be that humility. There's got to be an understanding that that there's something very wrong, and I don't even think we're there, not at all, to even be able to acknowledge.
In terms of truth, power, responsibility, we've got to do a better job, because if we don't, somebody else will come along and delegitimize us. So if we are just pursuing a particular ideology, I think any profession that is ideologically based especially in the United States of America, where the pendulum can swing, there is potential for the pendulum to swing and for us to be delegitimized as a profession. I've shared this with others, but there are legislatures that have defunded a university because they were teaching something that the legislature deemed as inappropriate. When that happens, if the Council on Social Work Education is deemed as purely ideological, I think it exposes itself to the winds of change in democracy. And so CSWE could potentially be dismissed or or impacted, and so either it self-corrects or another institution may have to come along to provide an alternative that could provide some credentialing where social work may have taken a hit.
Any other questions? How do we keep from being anti? Just we're anti this and we're anti that. You know, I mean, well, you mentioned University of Austin. You know, one of the pushbacks against them is that they don't know what they are except for being anti, right?
Well, the opposite to anti is pro. So what do you stand for?
Yeah, I think the language tends to be very defensive, of just like, well, this is what you are, then I am anti that. Which we don't want to talk about what I'm pro. I just want to be opposite to you. And we're so infatuated with difference, you know, and we fail to realize that we have 99.999% in common, and the 0.001% that we have different is all we tend to talk about. And, you know, I don't know what you're thinking of when I say that, but I'm personally thinking of Democrats and Republicans, is that everyone wants what's best for the world. Everyone wants what's best for America. Everyone wants what's best for America. Yet the right tends to think that the left doesn't know what it's doing. Either they're stupid or they have ill intentions, and vice versa. It's not true. I think we need to do a better job of humanizing the other and understanding that everyone is acting in good faith. We all want what's best for the world, for ourselves, for America. We just have different ideas of what the best looks like. And in that effort, sometimes when you have an idea, the best way for me to express how I differ from that is to call myself anti that. And you're right, maybe that's not the right way to do it.
When as soon as you become anti something, you chain yourself to it. You're now anchored to it. If we want to be liberated, if we want to be free, we have to identify what it is that we ourselves believe in and stand for that. And that's where I think the NASW Code of Ethics is very strong, because it's very easy to stand for service, to stand for social justice, to stand for individual rights, and relationships and competence and integrity. Those are things that I can stand for without necessarily having to be against anything else. And I think assuming the best, giving people the benefit of the doubt, assuming that we have something to learn, again, you know, humanizing others, humanizing those differences, dialoguing across those differences, and standing for ethical principles. I'll just continue to preach. That's what I think we can do.
I want to thank all of you for your attention today, and I can vouch that these are all wonderful people that you should follow up with questions, comments, concerns. We really appreciate all of you coming here to do this today and to celebrate HXA social work.
Elizabeth, thank you for hosting an audience. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you.